Every morning, millions of people start their cars without thinking about one question. Why is gasoline so expensive? Why can one country produce huge amounts of oil, but its own citizens still pay high prices? And why can't consumers simply demand cheaper fuel? Oil is everywhere. It powers cars, airplanes, factories, ships, farms, and entire economies. Without oil, modern civilization would stop moving. But here is the strange part. The price of oil is not decided by ordinary people, not even fully by the countries that produce it. Instead, oil prices are controlled by a giant global system involving governments, billion-dollar companies, traders, wars, politics, supply chains, and financial markets. A single conflict thousands of miles away can suddenly raise fuel prices in your local gas station. A decision made in a meeting room in the Middle East can affect transportation costs across Africa, Europe, America, and Asia. And even when oil becomes cheaper underground, prices at the pump often stay high. Why? Today, we are going deep into the hidden world of oil. We will explore how oil became the most powerful resource on Earth, why prices constantly rise and fall, who really controls the market, why fuel prices are not simply cut in half, and why consumers have less power than they think. Before we begin, like, share, and subscribe. Let's dive into it. This is the story of black gold, and once you understand it, you will never look at fuel prices the same way again. Before oil, the world moved slowly. People used horses for transportation. Factories ran on coal. Ships depended on wind and steam. But in the late 1800s, everything changed. Oil became the fuel of the industrial age. The invention of the gasoline engine transformed transportation forever. Cars became possible. Airplanes became possible. Modern warfare became possible. Suddenly, nations realized something important. Whoever controlled oil controlled power. During the 20th century, oil became more valuable than gold in many situations. Entire economies grew around it. Huge oil companies emerged, including Exxon Mobil, Shell, BP, Saudi Aramco. Countries with large oil reserves suddenly became strategically important. Places like Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Russia, Venezuela became central players in the world economy. Oil was no longer just fuel. It became political power. Many people think oil prices are simple. More oil equals cheaper fuel. Less oil equals expensive fuel. But the reality is far more complicated. Oil prices are controlled by five major forces. This is the basic foundation. If the world needs more oil than producers can supply, prices rise. If producers create too much oil, prices fall. For example, when economies grow fast, factories increase production, airlines fly more, and transportation expands. That means more oil consumption. But during global crises, demand can collapse. In 2020, during the COVID-19 pandemic, people stopped traveling. Airplanes were grounded. Factories slowed down. Oil demand crashed. At one point, oil prices became so unstable that traders were practically paying people to take oil storage contracts. That shocked the entire world. One of the most powerful groups in the oil industry is OPEC. OPEC is a group of oil-producing nations that work together to influence global oil supply. Countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, can reduce production to push prices higher. Why? Because when less oil reaches the market, scarcity increases, and scarcity creates higher prices. This is one reason fuel prices cannot simply be cut in half. Oil-producing nations depend heavily on oil revenue to fund their governments and economies. If prices collapse too much, entire national budgets suffer. Oil markets fear instability. A war near major oil-producing regions can immediately raise prices worldwide. Even rumors can affect the market. For example, conflicts in the Middle East, sanctions against Russia, attacks on oil facilities, shipping disruptions. All of these create uncertainty, and uncertainty increases prices because traders fear future shortages. Oil is mostly traded globally in US dollars. That gives the United States enormous influence over the global oil trade. When the dollar becomes stronger, oil often becomes more expensive for countries using weaker currencies. This is why some developing countries feel oil price pressure even more strongly. This surprises many people. Not everyone buying oil actually wants barrels of oil. Some traders simply bet on future prices. Huge investment firms, hedge funds, and market speculators buy and sell oil contracts every day. Sometimes prices move not because of real shortages, but because of fear, predictions, or market psychology. Oil is both a physical product and a financial asset, and that makes pricing extremely unpredictable. This is one of the biggest questions people ask. If my country produces oil, why am I still paying high fuel prices? The answer involves economics, infrastructure, and global trade. Crude oil coming out of the ground cannot directly power most cars. It must first be refined into gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, kerosene, plastics, chemicals. Refineries are expensive. Some oil-producing countries do not have enough refining capacity. So they export crude oil and import refined fuel back at higher prices. That increases costs. Oil is traded globally. If one country sells fuel far below world prices, companies may lose profits, or smugglers may illegally transport fuel across borders for resale. This has happened in multiple countries. Cheap domestic fuel can create black markets, smuggling, government debt, fuel shortages. So governments often try to balance affordability with economic stability. Fuel taxes are extremely important in many countries. Governments use fuel taxes to fund roads, infrastructure, public services, transportation systems. If fuel prices are dramatically reduced, government income also falls. That creates financial pressure. Some governments try to keep fuel artificially cheap through subsidies, but subsidies cost enormous amounts of money. If oil prices rise globally, governments must spend billions to maintain low local prices. Eventually, many countries cannot sustain this system, and when subsidies are removed, fuel prices suddenly jump. This often causes public anger and protests. Many people believe consumers should decide prices. After all, consumers are the ones buying fuel. But oil markets do not work like ordinary products. Here is why. Oil is a necessity. Most people cannot simply stop using fuel overnight. Workers need transportation. Food must be delivered. Factories need energy. Demand remains strong even when prices rise. Economists call this inelastic demand. People complain about fuel prices, but they still need fuel. That weakens consumer bargaining power. The world depends on oil. Modern civilization was built around oil infrastructure. Roads, airports, shipping routes, logistics systems, and factories. Almost everything depends on petroleum. Replacing all of this would take decades and trillions of dollars. That means oil producers still hold massive influence. Consumers are divided. Oil markets are global. Consumers are spread across hundreds of countries with different governments, economies, and interests. But major oil producers and organizations are often more coordinated. This imbalance creates stronger pricing power on the producer side. Panic buying makes things worse. Whenever people fear shortages, they buy more fuel. That sudden demand spike can raise prices even further. Fear itself becomes part of the market. Today, oil remains one of the most important resources on Earth. Despite growth in renewable energy, the world still consumes massive amounts of petroleum every single day. Major benchmark oil prices include Brent crude, West Texas Intermediate, often called WTI. These prices constantly change, depending on global demand, OPEC decisions, geopolitical tensions, economic growth, currency strength, financial speculation. Even a small production cut can move global markets dramatically. Meanwhile, electric vehicles are slowly changing the future. Companies like Tesla push the idea that transportation may eventually rely less on gasoline. Countries are also investing heavily in solar energy, wind energy, battery technology. But experts believe oil will remain critical for many years because airplanes still depend heavily on jet fuel. Shipping industries still use petroleum. Plastics and chemicals still require oil products. The transition away from oil is happening slowly, not suddenly. Here is something many people never realize. Oil prices are not only about oil. They reflect the condition of the entire global economy. When oil prices rise sharply, transportation becomes expensive. Food prices often increase. Manufacturing costs rise. Inflation spreads across economies. That is why governments pay extremely close attention to energy prices. Oil affects nearly everything people buy. And because oil is deeply connected to politics, economics, and national security, true free market pricing rarely exists completely. Governments intervene, organizations intervene, corporations intervene, financial institutions intervene. The oil market is one of the most politically sensitive systems on Earth. So why can't oil prices simply be cut in half? Because oil is not controlled by one person, one country, or one simple decision. It is tied to global supply chains, international politics, wars, refining systems, financial markets, government budgets, transportation networks, and the entire structure of the modern economy. And why don't consumers decide the price? Because the world still depends too heavily on oil to give consumers full power. As long as civilization runs on petroleum, oil producers and global markets will continue to shape the price. But the future may slowly change. Electric vehicles, renewable energy, and new technologies are beginning to challenge the dominance of oil. The question is not whether the world will eventually change. The real question is, how long will it take? And until that day arrives, every time you fill your tank, you are participating in one of the largest and most powerful economic systems in human history. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And remember, the next time fuel prices rise, look beyond the gas station. Because the real story begins far away from the pump.